And so thank you so much to Daniela and Kelly for presenting on your project, the WaterTAP project. I'm really excited. Thank you again, also everybody who's joined us this afternoon. Really appreciate your time and attentiveness to everything going on across the institution as far as research goes. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Kelsey. So I guess we'll get started. So thanks first for spending some time with us today. And before we get started, we do want to thank the APUS Research Faculty Grants and their wonderful new name as well for their support and for this opportunity to come and speak with you today. So welcome to our presentation and introduction of student engagement through WaterTAP Testing and Awareness Project, which we call WaterTAP. I'm Daniela Messina, and I'm here today with my colleague Kelly Reiss to discuss our WaterTAP project, which engages the junior level environmental science majors in hands-on data collection. So WaterTAP is an example of participatory science since it engages students with real-world experience with science topics that might otherwise be unavailable to them in their day-to-day lives. So within this context, WaterTAP was designed to connect users with the means to test their local drinking water quality and report their results. So drinking water quality directly affects end users in a variety of areas. So regardless if it's farmland, city, or etc., this is important information for us to know. So with that in mind, let me take you through how we designed our project and chat a little bit about our objectives and our research questions, methods, process path. So WaterTAP participants voluntarily conduct hands-on testing of water samples using a water analysis test kit that can detect 11 parameters, including lead and coliform bacteria. And participants report results via an online data entry form, thereby building the database. WaterTAP currently has over 260 reported results from across the United States and 2 US territories. So our design concept utilizes the underlying ideas of participatory science, namely to invite our students to voluntarily participate in the scientific process. And in our case, in testing drinking water quality, it allows direct participation of students and helps them make further connections to their water, something that's critical in the daily lives of themselves and their loved ones, introduces and broadens their understanding of the cradle to grave concept. It's meaningful, it's relevant, and it's easy to do. And lastly, demonstrates how they can be a citizen scientist in our ever-expanding digital world. So regarding our objectives, these include to provide the opportunity for students to participate in hands-on drinking water quality analysis through WaterTAP, and Kelly will make a comment about this a little bit further on, and using individual test kits, running the tests and reporting findings in the online data entry tool, and share findings of the WaterTAP across students and our university community, such as you all today. So the research questions that we wanted to address, there's a few of those. So let's go through those. So the first is, do local drinking water supplies meet regulatory guidelines for drinking water standards as identified under the Safe Drinking Water Act? Also, across the APUS student community, does the drinking water supply meet regulatory guidelines? Also, did voluntary participation in WaterTAP enhance participants' understanding of drinking water quality? Did hands-on participation in WaterTAP enhance participants' retention of drinking water quality knowledge? And how have or will participants apply their knowledge of drinking water quality after participating in WaterTAP? So a little bit now about the methods. So to bring awareness of drinking water quality and analysis, volunteer participants conduct testing of water samples, as we know. The sample locations can include homes, offices, or other supplies of interest. Testing utilizes a readily available water analysis test kit that can detect parameters such as lead, pesticide, coliform bacteria, iron, nitrates, nitrites, chlorine, copper, alkalinity, pH, and or water hardness. And we use the Test Assured Complete Water Analysis Test Kit. We do have a few other vendors, and I'll speak a little bit to kind of an issue that we ran along further on in the presentation. So the process path is pretty simple. If you can see it there on screen, students volunteer to complete the test kit request online. They receive their free testing kit. They run the included tests, and then they report their results into the online form, and that records the data into the WaterTAP database. So let's take you for a little bit of a deeper dive into what has driven WaterTAP's conception and what we've found to date. So the idea for WaterTAP originated after becoming aware of many high-profile news stories regarding drinking water contamination and its resulting human health impacts. So to understand the importance of clean drinking water and how it's regulated, I'm going to share some insights into the motivation for the drinking water testing as the foundation of a student-driven participatory science project. So students are learning about these regulations in the academic classroom, and WaterTAP offers a tangible and personal pathway for them to connect these topics. It's important to note that the regulation of drinking water varies from the type of water system. So we have public water systems that are regulated by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, affectionately known as the EPA, which is shown on the left column in the chart, and individual water systems such as private wells depicted in the center, or may or may not be regulated. Shown on the right is bottled drinking water, which is regulated by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. Water contamination has been in the news frequently in recent years. Likely the water contamination case that you're most familiar with is the high-profile Flint, Michigan case. That's still kind of a little bit fresh in our memories, which concerned lead contamination and also includes several other concerns from biological concerns such as Legionnaire's disease and fecal coliform bacteria to chemicals such as trihalomethanes or TTHM, which are present. So you might recall hearing also when the city of Jackson, Mississippi had been in the news in the fall of 2022 for its drinking water quality and distribution troubles. And in March 2023, there was a public scare with potential contamination to the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania water supply due to a chemical spill that occurred in a tributary to their surface water source. There have been, unfortunately, many other local or drinking water contamination case studies that you may also have heard about from Newark, New Jersey, also with neurotoxins from pipe corrosion to Enterprise, Louisiana, with lead and biological concerns, to Denmark, South Carolina, with detectable concentrations of a disinfectant not approved for human consumption. Another high-profile news story from the fall of 2021 was the petroleum spill at Red Hill Bulk Fuel Storage Facility in Hawaii that affected many of our students, our military students, their family members, and or friends that are in the area. And from now, I'm going to switch over to Kelly, and she's going to talk a little bit about how drinking water is regulated.
Great. Thanks so much, Daniela. So while waterborne disease reporting did begin way back in the 1920s in the US, regulation only began in 1974 with the passage of the Safe Drinking Water Act and adoption of the National Primary Drinking Water Standards about a decade later. So only recently have we seen the US EPA adopt any amendments to this act related to currently the forever chemicals or PFAS. You've probably heard about these in the news quite a bit. And it's exciting to see a change to our Safe Drinking Water Act standards. Currently, PFAS is not a parameter that we measure in WaterTAP, but it is something that our water science students are very interested in, probably because it's so much in the news, and perhaps an avenue to look into in the future. So the U.S. has a long history of contamination in our drinking water supply, as do most of the industrial world. If we turn to history, we can see decades and decades of drinking water contamination concerns. The focus depicted in the table here is looking at chemical concerns, but we do find in practice that biological concerns can play a compounding role in our drinking water. Oftentimes, after a chemical concern, we also find outbreaks of biological agents. In many cases, both chemical and physical concerns play a role in drinking water issues in the same location over time. And so we're developing this ArcGIS story map to help identify drinking water contamination concerns across the US. The link is a little bit cut off there, it looks like, but we'll go ahead and throw that in chat after the presentation. So if you're interested, you can take a look at that as well. That's one of the educational tools that we're trying to develop from our WaterTAP project. And we've included in here a list of general references, and I'll just spin through them, but just so that you know they are available to you, you could always pause the recording to grab any of these that you'd like. They are depicted as general references and then specific to locations. And again, this is to hopefully show you just the robustness of how important this issue is, not just to each individual, but across the US. And that's where so many of our students are located as well. Very relevant topic for them. So now what follows is a review of the water quality findings and the results that we have reported through May 2024. As you've probably noticed, WaterTAP has a lot of different components. We have the participatory science, and we have the education on water quality standards and the history of drinking water, the locations of these stories. And we also want students to be able to work with the actual data that they're collecting and do some calculations and really comparing them to standards as well. So the following slides here are going to offer us basically some information on what WaterTAP is reporting against. So what we're looking at the findings from the data compared to the standards. What you'll see listed here are the National Primary Drinking Water Regulations, and within those we have maximum contaminant level goals and maximum residual disinfectant level goals. Some of the parameters also have secondary drinking water regulations or standards. And then we also have a few that are known as common measurements that we compare for things like corrosion control and aesthetics in the drinking water quality. And those we're referencing to a textbook in water science by Spellman. And the audience can further explore these regulatory guidelines. We won't take a lot of time here to explain what they are and where to find them, but we do want to source them and let you know that they're available to you and that you can take a look at these further as well. All right, so the WaterTAP testing as an overview, we do have data from 2019 to 2024 that we're reporting on today. The current analysis includes 260 samples, and we've gotten a few more in to date, so that's why we're at 260 plus now. But this analysis focuses on those 260 samples. We have 238 unique zip codes that are represented in the data set, and these occur in 46 of the US states and 2 US territories. What we found is that about 78% of the samples are from the public water supply. You might recall when we were discussing how drinking water systems are classified and regulated, as Daniela covered, we do have these different categories. So we see 78% from the public supply, about 17% from private wells, and about 5% we've categorized as other or unknown. These might be small community wells or just another type of water system that's uncommon, and so we've grouped those together here. So what we're looking at here is a panel of box and whisker charts. Some of you may be familiar with those. On this panel in particular, we have chlorine, pH, alkalinity, and hardness, 4 of the parameters in the WaterTAP test kit. And what you can see is there's a darker blue here is the public water supply, and the orange is the private wells, and the sort of light blue is the other or unknown water source. And that's the case for all of the charts that you'll be looking at of these box and whiskers. And for each box, that shaded rectangle that you're looking at, that represents the first through third quartiles of the data. So, the majority of the middle data. The lines extending out from the boxes represent the normal data range, and then any dots like those up here at 10 for chlorine under the public water supply, those are considered outliers in the data set based on the statistical analysis. You'll also notice that on these box and whisker charts, the relevant standards for each parameter is identified by these dashed lines. And some parameters like chlorine, they just have a maximum value as shown here. And then other parameters will have ranges. For example, pH has 2 bars here in dash, and those suggest that the range for pH is ideally inside of those standards there. And so the graph panels, we're going to look at each of these together, I suppose separately here as we go through. So specific to chlorine, this is again the same chart that you were looking at before, but a little larger for more detail. Most of the samples do fall under the regulatory threshold for chlorine. Chlorine is commonly used as a disinfectant in U.S. drinking water supplies. And so, as we might expect, those private wells have very little, if any, chlorine present. Usually, wells are only dosed with chlorine when needed and not daily, as you might expect in a water supply. In total, about 5% of the samples exceed the maximum residual disinfectant level goal, which is set at 4 parts per million. pH we're seeing here, pH is monitored because it influences both chemical and biological processes in water. For example, pH is adjusted to control coagulation and corrosion in water treatment, and higher low pH values can inhibit microorganism growth. So while most of the samples you'll see do fall within the National Secondary Drinking Water Regulations standard range in between those two dashed lines, we did find that nearly a quarter of the samples had pH readings either less than 6.5 or greater than 8.5, falling outside of that ideal range for pH. And I put alkalinity and hardness together here. We can consider them together in the role that they play in drinking water treatment and things like corrosion control and aesthetics. Moderate alkalinity helps buffer against pH changes, and in WaterTAP, we found about 4% of the samples are considered to have high alkalinity, greater than 200 parts per million, and about 58% of the samples have low alkalinity, below 80 parts per million, falling outside of the target ranges there. Regarding hardness, we see this is a common parameter for aesthetic concerns. Nearly half of the samples are classified as moderately hard, with hardness reading between 75 and 150 parts per million as the target. Water hardness is something that we probably hear and think about ourselves when we're thinking about how easy it is to clean soap from a product or something along that line. So the following panels here present findings for 4 additional parameters. I just want to let you know that they are set up in the same way with the color coding for each of the water supplies and with the different limits, in this case, the MCLG shown as well. So in all sources, we found few samples that reported concentrations of nitrate or nitrite. For nitrate, most of the samples had no detectable concentrations reported, and even fewer of the samples have nitrite, and only one of the samples exceeded the MCLGs, which is great news. All right, for most of the samples, we're looking now at copper and iron, 2 metals that are in our drinking water quality. For the most part, they are at or below their respective MCLGs. All water supply sources do have exceedances for copper, no matter the type of water supply. And you can see those third quartiles, though, meeting the standards. Remember when you're looking at those box and whisker pots. So we did also notice that a higher proportion of private wells and other water sources had iron present than in the public water supply, noted by the colored boxes down here on the iron chart. And the next 2 slides are going to show you a different kind of chart, and these are representing data for each water supply as a percent of the samples. The light blue portion shows the percent of samples testing negative, and the red shows the positive. So here you can see about 6 to 8% of the samples are positive across the water sources for bacteria. And if we look at pesticide and lead, we see similarly about 5% of the samples in both the public supply and the private wells tested positive for pesticide. And then we found 2% of samples were positive for lead, and those were only in the public supply that we found those. In reality, that is about 4 or 5 individual tests that tested positive for lead in our data set. So as a summary, overall, few of our samples reported pesticides or lead, but the ideal conditions would be, of course, finding none of those. Most, but not all of the samples in the WaterTAP dataset do meet the regulatory standards for either their primary or secondary recommendations. We did note some concerns to include 24% of the samples falling outside of the ideal pH range. And we did see that copper occurs right at the maximum contaminant level goal in 60% of the samples. Being at the goal is not an exceedance, but being any higher than it is. So that is a high number that we noted. We also saw that private wells had iron present more often than the public supply. And we did find some exceedances, small, single digits, but in the following parameters: chlorine, copper, bacteria, pesticide, and lead as well. As before, we've included our references slide here so that you can take a look if you're interested in going further. And as we continue to build the WaterTAP project, we will say it hasn't been without its challenges. So one thing that we would note is that we did begin this in late 2019. And I think I'm going to pass this on to Daniela now to jump in a little bit.
Thanks so much, Kelly. Okay, so as Kelly mentioned, this was not a straight road as depicted here in this graphic. It was anything but. And because we began in 2019, not really knowing what was fully ahead of us, we had a bit of a slow start with the COVID-19 limitations that we found ourselves with. So COVID-19 disruptions to business and general life worldwide, including mailing, was a problem. Our military students being in flux with their deployments also impacted the testing kit requests, the receipt, and the reporting of the results. We had shipping disruptions causing postal delays and losses. And we do have, with respect to the class size of EVSP, you'll note that it says 20, an average of about 20 students per term. It's a little bit higher from what Kelly tells me. I don't teach the class directly, Kelly does. And so she's able to speak a little bit more to the size of the average class as it is for 2024. And participant follow-up on the results was also a bit problematic. So anyone who's got a research project where you need to have your participants report back, that's always interesting because it's not something that you can force them to do. They are voluntary participants, so they can choose not to do it. So sometimes the reporting lags. We do have to remind them every now and again, but we're very proud of the actual rate for which we have responses back from our students. So we did have some pickup, as you can imagine, as the pandemic played out. We did speed up in our project goals from 2022 onward, and we're going to continue to build the WaterTAP database and allow for further correlations, as Kelly already mentioned. So let's chat a bit about how we've already integrated WaterTAP into the student learning. Thanks, Kelly. So students enrolled in the EVSP Water Science course have several opportunities to engage with the WaterTAP dataset in discussions and also in a case study assignment. So whether the students are able to participate in testing their own tap water or not, they're able to analyze a portion of the WaterTAP dataset provided to them and communicate their analysis to their professor and their classmates. And a section of the course's work focuses on understanding drinking water treatment, and this participatory science-driven data set presents a real-world application of otherwise abstract and technical standards. And then you can see how technical they can get as Kelly was going through her information. So now let's take a look at how the students feel about participating in WaterTAP and what they've gotten out of their experience. So you can see here that there's a number of comments that we were able to harvest, in a certain sense, from the students that had participated. And just to point out, they really responded well to participating within WaterTAP. And so not only are they learning about a critical resource themselves, and I know that there was a comment here by Dawn that, yeah, it is. Water is incredibly important, right? So not only were they able to learn about that critical resource themselves, but they're involving their family and communities as well. And we highlighted a few of those comments for you there.
Right,
Kelly?
and another thing to note, we've actually heard from some of our fellow faculty about how excited students were for having that hands-on testing opportunity provided to them by WaterTAP. Of course, it is voluntary, but students enrolled in EVSP 310 are invited to participate with us. So just to give us a recap, we wanted to sort of give you a little bit more information in case you had any questions for us and you know how to reach us as well. Students in the general public often do not realize that their water is not completely distilled or sterile, containing impurities and regulated limits of chemical compounds. I find students are always surprised to find that their water has things in it, right? These acceptable limits. And so WaterTAP helps provide students in the APUS community with knowledge of the drinking water quality locally and across the US, and it builds student confidence in data collection and analysis through integrating WaterTAP into our class assignments. Our inspiration for selecting water testing as a basis for this project was for water contamination cases that we hear about throughout our local and national news as well. And the project has continued to grow as we communicate out the results through talks and blogs, and we even participated in an X symposium, which is formerly known as Twitter. We look forward to continuing WaterTAP into 2025 as we continue receiving results. And in fact, we were recently highlighted as an exemplar virtual poster by the Association for Advancing Participatory Science, or APS, which was formerly known as CITSI, or Citizen Science Association. And this is our screen capture. We were so excited that they used our integrated interactive poster to sort of model this for their next conference. We remain interested in finding different ways to promote hands-on learning for WaterTAP participants who are mostly junior level Bachelor of Environmental Science students. And as you're probably familiar with our university, our participant pool includes a lot of non-traditional students, and a majority of them do have a military background. So thank you for joining us today for our presentation on WaterTAP. If you'd like to learn a little more about the principal investigators, please check out our bios here. And you can always reach Dr. Messina and myself through our project email, which is watertap411@gmail.com. You can follow us on X at watertap411. And if you'd like to, you can check out our pilot sort of version of our ArcGIS story map. It's ongoing in development. So thank you very much for spending your time with us today. We're happy to take some questions or, field those out if you'd like to reach us through email.
Thank you so much, Kelly and Daniela. I would encourage you to keep that last slide up as well, just for the contact information while we field some questions. Sylvia Numbers asks, can you address why testing water at a tap is more important even when water is tested at the source?
Sure. I'll go ahead and jump in. Thanks for the question, Dr. Nemers. One thing that our students are quite familiar with is the story coming out of Flint, Michigan. And those of you who are not familiar with the story, there was a corrosion control problem which resulted in lead coming through the pipes. Now, the water that left the treatment facility had some problems with it, but it didn't have lead in it. Once the water came through the piping, and interacted, it was highly corrosive and it wasn't properly controlled for things like alkalinity and pH and some of the parameters that we're looking at there. And so what happens is that corrosive water interacts with old piping, like we have in so many of our homes. I'm in New England and the piping here is very dated. So the metal piping, the solder that keeps the joints together, they begin to leach lead and copper. And those are very important health risks, especially for developing children and fetuses as well. So the water tap at our facility is tested, but then it goes through miles and miles of distribution systems and it ends up at our tap. And it's involved in very, different conditions. There's leaks in the system, they lose pressurization, etc. So we felt that the students in this way, something they engage with every single day, they go and they brush their teeth in their water or they shower in it or they use it for making pasta or to drink or to make tea, right? They're intimately connected with this water source. So it was a way for us to connect them with something in their households, in their everyday lives, and to connect science to it as well.
It's an important piece that Kelly mentioned and a great question from Dr. Nemers. Think about the fact that when Kelly was going through the last portion of the slide, she'd mentioned that a lot of students have this perception that their water is sterile. But they forget how far it has to travel from the source all the way to come into their glass. It's really important to think about that pathway because it's not just the responsibility of the water source, watershed, or what have you. It's the responsibility of anyone who's connected through that entire pathway, inclusive of the homeowners. You should know what's coming up into your home. I live in a home that was built in 1849. So that's a concern that we have a lot of piping that goes through and we've had it tested to make sure everything is on the up and up. But it's a very important concern.
Thank you. And there's another question in the chat here from Wendy. It says, if I understood correctly, it sounds like this is the only research that involves students. Can you share a bit about how the process for the involvement flows and how you manage to get them through to completion? I know we saw the roadmap, but
Yeah. So it's pretty simple. Wendy, to your question, um, it is research at the moment that only involves our students. So they are the voluntary participants. And so in the 310 water, their water science course, there are different intervals in which there'll be an announcement that's posted to invite the students to go ahead and submit a request to receive a kit and to go through the process. Um, Now, like I said earlier, do we have 100% reporting rate for all the kits that we send out? No, because that would be lovely, but unfortunately, no. But what we do is we do send out a few confirmations. So if the student requests a kit, they're also asked to verify or confirm their name and address for shipping to our WaterTAP email. And once they do that, we have that secondary confirmation, then I'll go ahead and send out, or Kelly will, we kind of tag team on sending the kits out. We'll send out a kit. And after it's mailed out to the student, we also send them a shipping notification, and they know that the shipping notification is coming. So, again, for faculty here, we all know how difficult it is for students, for us to get the students' attention and for them to look at their email. So we try very hard to get them to follow along. So we have that shipping notification so that they know that it's on the way. They know it's going to get to them within 7 to 10 business days, and they know that they have about a week to be able to turn the results around when we ask them to, at least. If we don't get it back within about a week or two, then I'll send out, or Kelly will send out a reminder to their email, whichever email that they used, and hopefully that kind of shakes the tree a little bit, and we get a few more results. But that's how we have to do it. So great question. Thanks for that, Wendy.
Susan has a question in the chat, but we're getting a little close to time for our next presenter. So if you don't mind just sticking around and maybe responding to her there. I really appreciate you both for taking the time. This is always an amazing project to check in on.
We appreciate it. Thanks so much for having us.